I believe Greg is doing this presentation, Mr. Mayor, if you're ready to go. You need to use your mic, James.
Who's up?
That'd be me. Good evening.
Hey, Greg.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. It's nice to see you sitting around council table. Maybe it won't be that far off where the majority of staff can join you in council chambers. So a quick preamble here before I hand things over to Aaron Lee, who's going to present tonight's presentation. So when we initiated this this push to complete our liquid waste management plan, we really set out to achieve a couple things, and the first being is some good long-term solutions and a way forward, and the second to ensure that our citizens, our First Nations communities, and the Ministry of Environment would also support these long-term solutions. And so I think with tonight's presentation, we'll be able to provide some good news to the steering committee. And in case you have any concerns around who the steering committee is, you guys are the steering committee. Council is the steering committee. So we are actually mandated to have some committees. We have to have a public advisory committee, a technical committee, and a steering committee, again made up by council. And we combined the public advisory committee and the technical committee into one. And so we have had a couple meetings with that group, productive, positive meetings with that group. And where we're kind of at now is we're reporting back to council, having completed our initial phase of gathering public input with a lot of public engagement work. And so we'll be able to report back on what we heard. A couple of things, just I guess logistics, housekeeping things. We do have a lot of material to get through, so I do ask council to write down your questions, and we'll have a good time for questions and answers at the end. With one exception, if you do need clarification on some of the information that we're presenting, it's appropriate to ask for that clarification. But that probably doesn't include what if, or did you think about this, or because we'll get to that and definitely have ability to have those discussions with the question and answer. I think the final thing at the end here, I'd like to talk a little bit around just the finances. So again, for the most part, Aaron will walk the steering committee through the presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Aaron.
Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. I'm just going to try to share my screen here. If folks can confirm that it's working.
It is working.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Your Worship, council staff, the steering committee. Thanks very much for having us here today. We have about 15 slides to update you on your liquid waste management plan. We were here almost 4 months ago where we listed and proposed to you a number of activities, some technical things that we needed to wrestle with, an engagement approach. And we talked about how we wanted to come back and report to you at about this time in June so that we could tell you a little bit more about some of the things that we've heard and some of the direction setting pieces that we wanted to put in front of you for discussion prior to sending off a report to the Ministry of Environment. So we're doing what we wanted to do, which is coming back to you today. Our purpose today is twofold. It's to present council, the steering committee, with an update on the process to develop your liquid waste management plan, and also to identify key elements of the proposed direction for the plan, including some of our next steps. We aim to do this by covering liquid waste management plan process and history, talk about some of the issues and the options to address them, a fulsome review of the engagement process and some of the feedback highlights so far, as well as talk a little bit about direction setting and those next steps. So a liquid waste management plan covers 5 technical topic areas. They're listed on the right-hand side: the collection system, the treatment system, clean water return, biosolids, and stormwater. When you add in financing and public engagement, you can see that there's an important process to go through to wrestle out the proper direction. In particular, there is a formal agreement at the end of it with the BC Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. And the intent with the plan itself in this agreement is to specify how this community will manage liquid waste over the long term, including how and where to return water back to the environment. The process itself is 3 stages. And as we were just describing, we're aiming to prepare a stage 1 and 2 report over the course of the next few weeks. There are 2 primary objectives to undertaking a liquid waste management plan. The first is to protect public health and the environment, and the second is to effectively consult the public. And while the liquid waste management plan is a BC-wide approach, water management in Lake Country is a bit special. And the important big goal that we've been wrestling with the entire time here is how to borrow water wisely and return it safely. And that really is the principal aim of this plan. There's ample histories for liquid waste management plans in BC, and yourselves have 25 plus years of running a liquid waste management plan as well. But while we're looking ahead, it's always wise to look back in terms of some of the key concepts for good planning. In particular, some key concepts for liquid waste planning include wastewater treatment has some historical significance. This was a first order priority upon incorporation back in the mid-90s. To convert failing septic systems to the centralized system, it's known as a proven water quality strategy. Back in the 1970s, water bodies in the Okanagan were experiencing a number of challenges, and getting folks onto the centralized system, especially where there were failing septic systems, was a key proven approach to making that happen. In Lake Country, that very much means from the core out. Growth and land use of the OCP guide service policy and capacity needs for liquid waste systems. That is to say, the liquid waste management plan serves the direction already set forward by the community. The intent here is to undertake a collaborative design where engagement informs the service delivery, where we listen well to various stakeholders and audiences and incorporate that into the technical solutions and the way forward. And the plan outcomes themselves ought to safeguard the environment and ensure there's adequate funding for liquid waste services and infrastructure. So what are the issues? Well, issues are just a short form of the questions that we like this plan to solve. But when we ask them in the form of questions, we tend to open our minds to seeing the patterns for direction. So you can see the list of issues here, but maybe putting them into questions. When it comes down to the collection system, we want to know how to most effectively operate and expand that collection system. We want to understand for the treatment system what the required upgrades are to modernize the plant and to meet capacity needs for new customers. For the clean water return, we want to answer this: how do we return clean water back to the environment safely and reliably over the course of 20 years and beyond? And what can we do to strengthen that biosolids program? And lastly, how do we enhance public and private stormwater practices to safeguard lake health? So we explore all of these in the plan, and we make special note of key issues that we're addressing as part of our preferred direction. So a liquid waste management plan looks out 20 years. It's a common time frame, and it works well for others, and it seems to work well here also. There are important milestones to consider over the course of the next 20 years, and this is what this plan is really about. Now, this is a graph that we've used multiple times before, but we wanted to take some time to sort of unpack it a little bit, because what it's saying is a whole lot more than 3 lines and a couple of comments. But here's really what we're trying to get at with this. First, that orange line reflects and represents the capacity of ground infiltration, which is your current approach to returning clean water back to the environment. Now, it may not be a perfect straight line. It's pretty steady, pretty reliable at that way, and it will take some investment to get it to 2,400, but it's good to note that it's generally quite fixed at about that level. The blue line is service connections and overall flow with respect to growth and being able to accommodate those new customers. So we can quickly see that accepting new customers begins to exceed what that in-ground capacity is. This is where you start getting into, well, how do we go about addressing the gap between how we return clean water to the environment today and being able to accept new service connections over the course of the next 20 years. And make some note of that moment in about 2028 where some of those septic retrofits and expanding the decentralized system goes out to pick up key neighborhoods with some of those septic systems that we were talking about. Really, the liquid waste management plan is being able to connect how we return water back to the environment with this potential service growth. The yellow lines are really what the plant can handle, and we can see on the left-hand side where it generally comes in and around today, and how investments into the phase 4 and 5 upgrades are done at the front end of the plan so as to provide at least the 20-year capacity in terms of what the new customers are projected to be. While it would be nice to just tinker with the plant over a gradual period of time so it more mimics the blue, the way that we go about upgrading these types of systems is that you do it well and the cost efficiencies come through as a bulk upgrade, both with ensuring that it has the capacity to meet those new customers, but also with the ability to meet the stringent requirements of returning that water back to the environment. So the key takeaway from this graph here is we've committed to serving customers based on the OCP. We need an alternate location to return clean water, and upgrades of the plants have begun and will last about 4 years. So while we have a feasible plan, as Greg mentioned at the start, you can feel that the push is on. So slides like the last one are part of what we've shared with the public today. The intent was to open it all up, share as much information as we possibly could, all the things that we were wrestling with, and put it in the hands of the community. That's been key to our process. To get here, we've steadily moved through the first 2 major phases to gather input over the course of this spring, as well as beginning to evaluate in terms of reviewing those liquid waste management options. From that green star in about the center, where we are today, we're hoping to continue with the stage 2 report with the preferred option based on the evaluation of public and technical considerations and get that back to the ministry, as well as conduct another round of engagement in the fall while we begin to think about the final stage 3 report and the implementation plan. So this is just kind of a truncated look at what liquid waste management plan looks like. It's always good to remember that you have decades of history with liquid waste management plan before, and it's very constructive to look at this as how do we tweak this vehicle that we already have in motion rather than starting brand new, and being able to sort of tackle on good ideas that take us forward the next 20 years, both cost effectively and as well as good for the environment, really is the core of what this plan is about. So part of what we wanted to do today too is share some of the results of that gathering input and the engagement process so far prior to coming back in the fall again. So with 5 technical topics and money and engagement and funding and finance, it's important to build some foundational items to bedrock the plan. What we mean by that is with lots of different variables across a complicated linkages between various things, it's really important to nail down those things that really are core items that we are committed to. And those are areas where we intend to make some investments and we can rely upon those. And those are on the left-hand side in green. Stormwater management enhancements, continued participation in overgrow, committing to those treatment plant upgrades, partly from an asset management standpoint and being able to keep pace with aging infrastructure, but also being able to accommodate new customers and new connections as they come online and being ready to return treated water safely back to the environment, including as well expanding that collection system from the core out. So those complementary components on the left-hand side really are sort of the bottom elements of the pyramid. But where we have some degree of choice is on the right-hand side. And this is really centered around how we go about returning clean water back to the environment. It's a very important topic to staff, council, and as we've learned as well to the community too. And because there are choices, this is where we want to get a good grasp on what matters to the public, from this committee as well as from the advisory committee. So we're going to share some of the results in terms of what we heard after we share with you a bit more about what we presented to the public in terms of what these options are. It's a bit of a meaty slide. There's a little bit to get through here, but we'll see if we can't tackle it sort of one at a time. The key here again is to figure out how best to return clean water to the environment. On the left-hand side, we have option 1. We're calling this our base approach. And the intent here is to return 100% of flows to Okanagan Lake. To do so would mean that we would move away from the ground infiltration approach and really stick to a more straightforward, cost-effective and safe approach. Now, in order to do that, you have to imagine where the plant is today, Beaver Lake Road, and a pressurized pipe returning that clean water over the hill to Okanagan Lake. In some ways, that pressurized pipe might be the first investment towards being able to tap in the future for potential reuse, such as park reuse or irrigation customers. However, this approach, this option number one, doesn't account for additional infrastructure to do that. It really is about being able to send that water safely to Okanagan Lake, but not precluding you from future expansion for reuse in the future. So in the bottom left-hand corner, option one is considered straightforward, cost-effective, and safe, but it would require future add-ons to meet some of the public interest in water sustainability. Option two, we're calling a hybrid safe return. Now it's hybrid in that it incorporates multiple components to achieve the same outcome. In this one, we would intend to maximize in-ground capacity for as long as feasible for some time. Also would be to add reuse potential irrigation systems in key areas so as to service, again, some of those parks or agricultural customers. And the intent would be to actually put the pipes in the ground to connect to some of the highest possible locations so as to get as much reuse as feasible in the short term. And only what's remaining would flow to Okanagan Lake. In summary, option two means more infrastructure and costs, but it does more for the public interest in the environment. And option three, and a little bit of an appetizer in terms of what the advisory committee has been able to offer us so far, which is quite a bit, came about through some of the conversation with them. And I think it really originated with this basic question around what could economies of scale look like in an area, in a smaller community surrounded by much larger communities who already have decades of large-scale treatment capacity and return to Okanagan Lake. So their question, we turned into a bit of an option to test with the public as well. And it relates to a service partnership with another public utility, with which you'd have access to larger teams, potentially some equipment purchasing, and some longer-term cost savings. But it would come with some relinquishing of autonomy. In summary, option three shifts risk and responsibilities a little, but it equals less autonomy, some uncertainty, and likely some new costs. Not all of this has been fully proofed out yet because it was a good idea that was presented earlier into the process that we shifted with the public. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. The right-hand side of this slide, the environmental impact study, is key because what it is a thorough and intensive study, and it ought to be because it takes the important job of being able to assess how to return water to Okanagan Lake safely. It does so by reviewing existing environment baseline conditions and thinking about cumulative effects. It assesses those risks, and it lands on that sort of key answer to that question of how to return it safely. While it's not complete, it's a few months away. The interim findings suggest it's a low-risk proposition and acceptable method of returning clean water to the environment, much like other communities in the Okanagan Basin. So these options and these descriptions are helpful. But what about capital cost? That's what we explore in the next slide. So the left-hand side remains the same. We have our three options, and the right-hand side is where we layer on the costs. For the base option, option number one, we have 5 key additional ingredients on the right-hand side: biosolids, stormwater, collection system, retrofit sewer and sewer expansion, and the wastewater treatment plant, and outfall upgrades to both of those, and inclusion of a new outfall. A total of $58 million, again, capital costs. For option two, it's all of what's listed in option one, plus an allotment for infrastructure for a basic reuse system, the tune of about 13.8, just under $14 million. In option three, we haven't been able to study this one in great depth on a financial basis because we wanted to first see what degree of interest there was from the public and other stakeholders. If it did prove out that there was a lot of interest, this could be studied further. Overall, it's important to engage the community with options as well as with their costs, and that's exactly what we did. All right, so moving from the technical options and heading now towards the engagement process overview. As mentioned at the start, a liquid waste management plan has 2 overarching objectives: to protect public health and the environment, and to adequately consult. So it's worth providing a bit of context before we dive into how Lake Country went about doing this. But we're privileged to work with a number of other good clients across BC with their liquid waste management plans. And it seems that every single liquid waste management plan processes the option to learn from previous ones and expand upon its approach or not. And the case here in Lake Country is that it seems to be that the process itself has grabbed a lot of the best practices from other locations. And that's resulted in an approach that's been quite strong. It's been open in that a lot of the information is presented to the public, especially upon request, very much on a proactive basis. It's been engaging. It's been a bit of fun. It's been accessible. Nothing's been hidden, and it's been quite thorough. Just about everything that we're dealing with on a technical reporting and engineering basis has been presented to and made available to the public. And I think that's part of the reason why some of the results we're about to walk through have been quite constructive and quite positive. So we're feeling like the benefits of this approach to engagement is starting to pay itself out. So overall, some of these nice results, how did that come about? By consulting with 9 Indigenous communities, including invitations to participate in the advisory committee or for separate conversations, of which there are follow-up meetings happening in the summer. Published 6 Fact Fridays, providing informative content on liquid waste, being able to take some of the issues that we described in previous slides and really expand upon them and really talk about what they mean to the community and perhaps even the individuals as well.
Sorry.
We've had 2 advisory committee meetings with 1 more planned for next week. And we wanted it to make sure that it was engaging and approachable. The public survey part is a key element that relates to the engagement process because it brings about very specific questions with some constructive answers. And it was put together with a lot of broad thinking around septic systems, OGOGRO, water reuse, stormwater management, and input on the options. Again, the intent was to bring back a really fulsome dialogue to this committee, to this council, to be able to weigh some of the options here and have a good conversation about what next direction could look like. The poop emoji and being a top story on Castanet was a highlight for us, and the video too, in terms of hundreds of people having a look at that online. And I can only imagine how many other communities might want to ask if they can borrow, you know, from some of this toolkit that you guys have developed. So strong engagement process. And the results to date have been quite helpful, especially for us on the team here. We just wanted to dive in a little bit deeper. Above all, our main objective here was to inform and to listen. So it was an open process, as we just discussed, all of it presented, lots of links to historical documents, PowerPoint presentations, Fact Fridays, a Q&A, being able to sort of start off with a few questions to make sure that it was approachable to people to come in, not trying to overdo it at the start. But as each question came forward, we'd answer it and add more to it. So it was constantly updated throughout. Multiple phone calls and online requests too. It was a strong level of engagement. It would rise and fall with different ways that information was being presented. And as those phone calls and requests came in, staff were quick to follow up and provide an answer to them. And this approach too yields more than just a good sense of engagement, but it also provides interesting ideas, such as some local minority but vocal interest in a district-owned sandy dump. But it wasn't all internet-based either. There was lots of availability for those looking for pen, paper, in person. So mail-outs, notices, and flyers that were sent out, hard copy surveys and front counter representation. All of that was there. A really comprehensive approach to making sure that those who wanted to have their say and wanted to be educated in that say had the opportunity to do so. Enforce basic sequences, inform, survey, listen, and then interpret that, which is part of what we're going to share again today. Attained over 1,000 touch points throughout, over 250 survey responses, 28 posed questions, hundreds of video views, and many more visits, downloads, and queries over the course of the last 3 months. A pretty strong effort and really solid results for this community. Consultation is important too, and worth taking time to do right. And the respect has been there to do it right. And that consultation with Indigenous peoples is being implemented through a separate but parallel government to government process with the communities and nations you see here. All right, the advisory committee. This was good. We had some fun. This was a very capable group, and they bring a special central voice to a project. We're grateful, and we say that at the bottom, for their time and focus and effort. This is not a paid position, but they seem to bring enough passion with it. You'd think that they might be. So this was definitely a strong group of people, and we continue to work with them, and we look forward to the next meeting here in about a week. On the right-hand side, we had about 6 to 8 committee members each meeting, which is a pretty ideal size for a virtual environment. And it really did allow for each committee member to voice up, ask questions, and to create a good dialogue among us all. Regular invites go out to 7 other public agencies and governments with sporadic attendance, but overall the representation was to be there from the community at large, the tourism sector, industry, small business, and the regional district. So how did it go? Well, on the left-hand side, we try to summarize some of that here. It really was an open exchange of information. We'd present ample technical reports, and we'd encourage them to read other historic reports. We covered some of the fundamentals, not too dissimilar from this committee here, and then we dive deep into some of the options and priorities. And they had requests, they had questions, and we provided good support in between the meetings. So it was both at the meetings and in between. And their contribution is felt. It does come through in some of the options so far today, in particular on option number 3. They also offered good insights on engagement, survey questions, good suggestions for reporting and different visuals that make sense for various audiences. And they were good about expressing their views on plan direction. Feel comfortable that we create a good space for people to be open and to ask these questions. And we're rewarded by doing so by getting some really neat thinking that we might not have otherwise get. So they've been hardworking and attentive, and we're grateful for their time. So when we combine committee feedback with public feedback, we had the chance to connect these into some feedback highlights. I'm going to start on the right on the survey statistics here. Mentioned that there was about 250 plus survey responses. The geographic distribution across the wards and the neighborhoods is pretty strong, pretty reflective of the overall population. Responders were well covered by demographics and age brackets as well. About half of the responders were on their own septic field. They were basically their own on-site wastewater treatment specialists, and the other half were on the central system. And this lines up well with your population statistics. We found that there was a strong awareness of Owoc Row, part of your biosolids program, but there tends to be limited use across private properties. 90% agree to use reclaimed water for irrigation. Either strongly or somewhat more moderately agree. So a strong voice from the community about agreeing to use reclaimed water for irrigation. And a rising interest from residents to contribute to stormwater and or septic system practices. So there's a bit of a culture brewing, not just in Lake Country, but specifically in Lake Country, about residents and property owners wanting to contribute to lake water quality and finding ways to do so. So there's an audience there, and there's a foundation to sort of tap into. So these surveys are helpful. We get to ask specific questions and we get some constructive data. On the left-hand side are feedback highlights, and this is really our way to try to summarize a lot of what we've been hearing so far. There is that strong desire, perhaps no surprise, for return water to Okanagan Lake that is safe, both compliant with the stringent requirements of the Ministry of Environment and fully reported on through the EIS, but also continuously monitored, not just now and into the future. There are some mixed views on whether to pursue lowest cost or to create reuse systems. And it seems that the public was grappling with that quite well. And it's important to keep having that conversation here at this table too, that there's a strong agreement to use reclaimed water, but there are mixed views on how much to spend at the onset. There's a rising demand to continue to retrofit other neighborhoods and expand the core area further. I think that demand has been there for some time. It just appears to be, turning up the volume just a little bit more gradually. There are some elevated concerns around growth, and in particular, making sure that new growth pays their fair share of infrastructure and capacity at the plant. Residents with septic systems are generally aware of the responsibilities to maintain them. That's both a sigh of relief. That's a good thing to hear, but it's also something to tap into and to build on as well to make sure that continues. And while septic systems age, that there is just as much proactive maintenance happening today as there ought to be moving forward. And again, that expressed desire for enhanced stormwater specifically, and if you were thinking about the end in mind for most of the feedback, it's to improve lake water quality, obviously a big source of pride for local residents. And lastly here, a modest interest, a slight interest. It's kind of neutral, but just a little bit of interest there without much push for some kind of public utility partnership. Probably not high enough to make you want to study it in a lot of detail, but it piqued the interest of a few. So with the technical options rustled through and some of this feedback from the public, the next milestone is creating that stage 1-2 report, sending it into the ministry. This is really where we articulate the plan direction. And articulating the plan direction means that there's some clarity in terms of where you're going. And that really requires some balance. The technical the social, the political, the economic, putting it all together in a direction that balances those things. And there's likely some phased implementation to balance costs and make sure the business case works out. But the intent here is that we can package up what needs to be done technically and what the voice of the community is and say, this is the path forward for Lake Country. So with those core foundational items in place and with some public feedback, we're looking to engage here today with council, with this committee, as we prepare to write that plan. We've tried to package up some of those key areas that both the public was wrestling with, our advisory committee has wrestled with, and we've thought long and hard about and continued to study. And they're sort of packaged up into sort of 4 general questions here. And perhaps I'll just read through each of them, and maybe I'll just check in with Ruth and Greg after that. But first, what is our level of interest in the business of reclaimed water? Those communities who have entered into reclaimed water think about the customers, they think about the economics, they think about pricing, they think about different approaches to making this happen. It's a little bit about putting pipes in the ground for sure, but it's a whole lot about being able to manage a small quasi-utility that has a different function unto itself. And how do we link this with some of our broader thinking around the water master plan and options for potable water substitution? So that first one is a real meaty one. What is the level of interest in the business of reclaimed water? 2, what is the level of support to build and pay for new capacity on liquid waste systems to service growth? Again, with development covering their share. I think it's easy to imagine the graph slide that we had about slide 6 or so that talks about building up the capacity early and ensuring that we get that paid back over time, and just making sure that we're all square on that's the approach we're going to take. And 3, how much local control do we want in wastewater treatment and clean water return? And what is our interest in exporting some responsibilities to a partner? So far, as we mentioned, public interest is pretty neutral on that. Interested, but not pushing. And so really just wrestling with that question, how much local control do we want? And last, what is the culture of environmental stewardship that we want in Lake Country? And should we continue our tradition of doing more than is required of us, for the benefit of the broader Okanagan Basin, and what might that mean for the policy areas and direction setting themselves? There's one more slide here about sort of preferred direction from here, so perhaps I can come back to that question slide in a little minute here, but I'll just do this one quickly. To complete engagement and public feedback phase and post that summary to the website, to meet with the advisory committee to present the results here in about a week's time, give them some update and feedback on this conversation, to continue to engage with the ministry on that preferred direction for Lake Country and author the stage 1 and 2 report to the ministry, and then to initiate some additional engagement for what we call the stage 3 report, which is about how we implement this and put this into reality in the fall of 2021. This really concludes the majority of the content here, so maybe I'll just stop sharing for a sec and go to Ruth and Greg quickly and just ask, should we head back to slide 16? Maybe some direction around which we should do from here.
I have a couple of questions. Councillor Gamble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I thought you were great on speed dial or whatever we call that. It was good. I had a couple of questions. One is what is the growth rate that you have settled on? There were a number of options, I believe, that were presented in the OCP, and I'm just wondering which one you settled on, and how many people we're talking about per unit are you using for your estimates there? Because the way I calculate for from 2028 to 2039, we're looking at about 1,830 units.
Greg, do you want to take this one here?
Sure. So we use the middle of the road number from the OCP. So when we pulled together the OCP numbers, we looked at kind of a projected growth. What happens if it's a bit lower? What happens if it's a bit higher? So we took the middle of the road number. Typical.
Talking 2, 3, or 4.
The 3% number.
3%. Okay.
Yeah, and when we look now, of course that reflects community growth overall, and so we have to make some evaluation around what's happening in the Seward area. and typically we're using, you know, on an equivalent unit basis, you know, 2.25 people per unit. And so 2.25 people per unit. And you know, again, we pull that into equivalencies. So, and it, you know, it is definitely a projection. And then we also looked at, well, if we do the retrofit sewers, what are those additional numbers?
Yes, okay, that was it. Now, I just want to make a comment on the reclaimed water for irrigation. Because having been a farmer most of my life, I have pretty strong feelings about this. And I have to say that currently it would not meet food safe regulations. A product that has been treated with wastewater, even if it's treated wastewater, does not meet food safe regulations for if you're trying to sell it in the store. Also, heavy metals are not removed, as far as I know, at the present time, have not been removed from the water that's treated through the wastewater treatment plant. Heavy metals can be taken up by plants. Actually, there's a lot of work that was done by Denise Nielsen at PARC, the Pacific Agri-Food Research Station. Anyways, they are taken up by plants and they can accumulate in the human body over time. They also can accumulate in the soil over time. It's things like cadmium, arsenic, that sort of thing. So it is something to be wary of, and it's something I know myself. I do not support that because I think these are unknowns. And unless we have proof that that is not going to accumulate in the soil and destroy our soils over time, we need to be pretty careful on that. I have no problem if you're going to use it for parkland or a, you know, but once you start putting it on food lands, you can compromise, and maybe not in the short term, but when we're looking 50 years out, that can be a problem. And and the other thing I would say is local control. I happen to prefer it. We formed a municipality for that very reason. So I'm I still have quite an allegiance to that. Anyways, that's enough. I've got another question, but I'll leave that for later.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thanks, Mayor Baker. Presentation. I got 5 or 6 different questions here, so I'm going to rattle them off and maybe you could kind of address them. They're pretty simple questions. The first one is, you alluded that the province has obviously got to sign off on our stage 1 and 2 presentation. My question, I guess, might be to Greg, is what happens if they say no? Simple. It sounds to me like your third option is a public-private partnership, or what I used to call a PPP, public-private partnership. And those kinds of things scare me, as Councillor Gamble just alluded to. We lose control, we lose a little bit of input, and the price is not up to us. So I worry about that. You talked about an ongoing environmental study that for the deep water outlet, and I would like to know the time frame for that completion and perhaps a number, a cost. You talked about 25 million for retrofit, and I'm wondering what it is we're retrofitting. Are we retrofitting the existing sewer system as it is today, or would that 25 million go towards some of the retrofit projects we have in our mind to remove the sewers from perhaps the east side type of thing? So is that 25 million, what specifically is it for? And the last question is about your Indigenous government consultation. You say it's done by a separate process delivered by the province. I don't understand that. I would like you to kind of dig a little deeper there and tell me what that kind of communication and consultation looks like. And that's the end of my questions. I also have preferences on the 4 questions you're asking us, but I'll wait until later.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll get Councillor Reid.
Well, let's get some answers.
You
Yeah,
got it? Oh,
let's
you got
not
answers?
stack too many here. We'll lose it. Aaron, do you want me to take a run at this?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Councillor Scarrow, can you repeat the first question, please?
Just what happens if the province says no to our stage 1, 2 application.
That's right. Okay, so with respect to the province, like Aaron probably could have answered this one. They have very much stipulated the process we need to go through. If we satisfy all aspects of that process, there should be no reason why they would deny it. It needs to stand up technically, and it needs to stand up in terms of the public support. And I think when I alluded early on that we've got some good news, and getting to these solutions, we feel we're very well positioned to carry through. So we're not identifying anything right now that's causing us something to really be concerned about. One thing I do want to mention is one of the concerns that we had, and I think it was raised by a couple of our council members, was what is the public position going to be on return to Okanagan Lake? And I think because we did put a lot of effort into going forward with what our issues were, what our solutions were, and how we were ensuring that the health of that lake was being protected and the health of people being protected. I think people understood that and they're supportive of it. And so one of the things that we will provide to councils is a full report on the engagement, and that gives some nuances to the things that we've covered over here. So for example, when we asked about the preference for having a potential partnering with other local governments. And we're probably not talking about a public-private partnership here. We're talking about partnering with other local governments, City of Kelowna, Regional District. Somebody mentioned Vernon. Yeah. So, and we just wanted to get a sense, what was the public standpoint on being masters of our own destiny, if you will, under full control. It was split right down the middle. It was 50-50 for the most part.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Haven't we been down that road with the City of Kelowna? Haven't we asked these questions?
We did, but for example, the regional district did express some interest, say, hey, we could come out and operate your plant. We have operators. We have a large staff contingent. We could provide that operational service for you guys. So that could be one partnering, model that we could look at. There's a number of different models we could look at. And it goes from, I don't think anybody's going to come forward with any magic solutions. I don't think they're going to, it's not likely we would take the sewage and convey it over to the plant in West Kelowna. So I think the solutions, the big solutions are going to have to be local, with the exception that there was a potential for going to City of Kelowna, but we kind of ruled that out as we worked. But there might be other partnering. And again, we just wanted to get a sense from the community on, what their preference would be around that. And we hadn't asked the question, so we thought it was important to ask the question. I hope that answers that part of it.
It certainly did. I wanted to just mention that option 2, the more expensive of the options that we would execute as a district, is probably my favored one. I believe if we're going to do this, if it's going to cost $56 million or $76 million, we might as well buy the Cadillac.
And
that's my opinion.
And this is definitely something that the steering committee will have to make that decision. It can definitely be, we'd like to see that as a priority. We're prepared to make additional investments in it. Now, for sure, the first option does not preclude that from happening in the future. And so it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of more of when, and do we do it sooner or later. In terms of a couple of the other questions you asked about monitoring, and that's a requirement. We're going to have to do an ongoing monitoring of that, and this is mandated by the province. So we have to do an ongoing monitoring of any discharge. Any liquid waste management plan requires that, and to ensure that damage is not occurring, or that you fully understand what's happening. So that's a given, and is ongoing.
Sounds like there's no red flags in the ongoing environmental asset or thing, but I wanted to know kind of when's this going to be complete?
The monitoring is never complete. The monitoring is an ongoing program for as long as you're discharging.
But the initial too.
Oh, the additional EIS? Yeah, we're a few months off yet. We need a few more months they usually want to see a year's worth of background data. So we're still got some more. Really what they're looking to capture is seasons. You know,
Okay.
when the lake's stratifying, when it's mixing, is it different in winter and summer? So that dictates the timelines.
Okay, then my final two questions were about the 25 million for retrofit and where that money is going to be applied to, if we know the answer to that yet, or
Yes, yeah, we do. Yeah, so that plan, and it's actually in the OCP. So it shows where all the retrofit areas are. And so we're getting quite a few questions on that, and we can point people to the OCP to find out, am I going to get connected to sewer? And so those retrofit areas are clearly identified, and they're typically the east-facing benches. So from, Calvern, La Cresta, that range of subdivisions, as well as the Isthmus and Cornwall areas of Oyama. So that dates back a decade when those things were really discussed. And carried through into our OCP processes. So, the iterative elements of infrastructure planning.
Okay, and then finally, I'd like to address Councillor Gamble's comments on reclaimed water. I certainly agree with her that it's not a food product, but I also understand that it is marketable. There is a market for it, and we can use those waters in places outside of food production and sell it and make some sort of an income out of it. So I'm actually in favor of, in the future, distance, maybe 10, 15, 20 years, of having the ability with the pressurized pipe to do that. I would like to leave that ability open to us as a district to see what develops over the next 10, 15 years in the way of water treatment, so that we would have that opportunity if we chose in the next decade, say. As for right, I agree with Councillor Gamble that it would be kind of a large initial expense to incur that right now, but I can see that being part of our future. The last question was about the Indigenous government to government work that's occurring. It's that way. Why aren't we talking to the natives directly? And what would be the benefit or negative of each?
Ruth, are you able to answer this one? Because I think Ruth has put a tremendous amount of effort into reaching out, but I think Ruth might be best able to answer this one.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. So to answer your question, the province did, when they outlined the consultation they wanted us to go through, they put it all on paper, and they outlined 9 different nations that they wanted us to touch base with. Keep in mind that the province does do a parallel consultation, but it's really up to industry, and in our case, the municipal government, to reach out, to talk to them, to explain the project, and to see if they require any information, if they want to have face-to-face meetings, in our case virtually, to really seek out what the nation would like. So Mayor Baker kindly wrote letters to each in January of this year, just to do an introduction to the project. And we followed up numerous times with each of those nations. So far we have 1 meeting scheduled with the Okanagan Indian Band, and that's scheduled for the first week of July. So we're just preparing for that meeting. There are several nations that have read the information, read the package sent to them, and have declined to comment. They wish to leave it to the Okanagan Indian Band to decide what the future of the project is on behalf of the nations. So keeping in mind the province is doing this in parallel, we have touch bases with the province, and they basically reach out to each of the nations outlined, those 9 nations, asking if the District of Lake Country has reached out to them and what they've decided. So just to make sure that our consultation report, as Aaron mentioned, our stage 1-2 report matches up to what the province is hearing. This is really on the municipality to ensure that the nations each have the information required. Aaron, did I cover that okay, or is there anything else you would like to add?
Nothing that I need to add. Thanks, Ruth.
I appreciate your work on that, Ruth. Thank you. Thank you very much, and I appreciate my peers' patience with me. I am complete.
Okay, thank you. Now, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can you hear me? Is it working okay? I just had a question on the numbers, surprisingly. The 58 million Does that include the retrofit sewer in that total?
Through you, Mayor, yes, it does.
I'm good.
Okay, that helps me there because I was going back to the 2019 presentation where the cost estimate was 30 million for the wastewater upgrade, but it didn't have any, the retrofit was separate. My second question is, if we have currently in-ground disposal, if I remember this correctly, why does it cost more to have in-ground and lake disposal as the new system when we already have in-ground disposal and we are adding the lake disposal to it?
Through the mayor, just to clarify, the question there is, why is option 2 more expensive than option 1?
Yes, when we
Yeah.
already have part of option 2 in place.
Right. It's a good question. Thank you, Councillor. The first option there being basically we would abandon the in-ground disposal approach in the short term and we would return 100% of the flows to the lake. And the second option, you would maintain the in-ground, but the majority of the capital cost difference is about expanding water reuse infrastructure out to customers for their use. So the difference between option 1 and option 2 costs doesn't have to do with the in-ground capacity. It has more to do with the water reuse infrastructure being proposed.
Okay, so what would be the cost of option 2 without the expansion of the system to allow reuse? And we just went with the 2 options of disposal in ground and then disposal into the Okanagan Lake, given that if the additional cost is outside of those 2 deliverables.
Greg, I see you queuing up here. I'm happy to answer first, or if you go ahead, it's up to you.
Well, that is option 1. If we don't expand, then we're really, because option 1 doesn't preclude us from continuing to use the disposal to ground at our with flexibility. One of the things that with the ground disposal system that it does provide us, regardless of option 1 or option 2, is a bit of a backup. So if we, for example, if we lost that force main broke or something, we've still got a discharge capability, and other communities don't have that. So we would never completely go away from it. We would keep it, and but we'd have that flexible operation. But to keep it simple, we'd say. And in fact, in operation, we may decide just 100% of the flows go to Okanagan Lake. And we want to be clear in that option that we have that ability to do that it doesn't have to be a split between the 2. We could send 100% there all year long if we deem that was in the best interest of the district.
So we wouldn't have in-ground water disposal as option 1 then? We would keep it?
Yes, we would.
Yeah.
The systems would remain.
Okay, so then if we come to the financing of that, if we go with option 1, it's $3 million a year plus interest. And if we go with option 2, it's $3.5 million a year plus interest. So how are we funding that expenditure, which is half a fire hall every single year for the next 20 years, plus interest?
Yeah, there's the challenge. Therein lies the challenge. If it was free, I would suggest we might be having a different discussion around, advancing that. Now it comes at a fairly high cost, and it comes with some other challenges as well. We have to find those customers. We have to sell it a little bit. Now, keep in mind, I mean, this is how Vernon manages the vast majority of its return. It is to fields and so on. And so, it can work, and it doesn't have to be direct from the pipe either. It could be, disposed to ground and then extracted from ground. So the ground does provide another level of filtration and treatment. Keeping in mind too, all of this water is returned to the environment and recycled in some fashion. So we're putting it in Okanagan Lake, pulling it back out of Okanagan Lake. It's a cycle, and then putting it back in Okanagan Lake forever and ever and ever. It's just how direct is that cycle.
My last question is that part of a note was made that partly this would be funded through growth. So how much in DCCs do we currently get that would be allocated if we had this project today? How much would get allocated out of the current DCCs? And therefore, what would be my shortfall that we're looking to fund from other sources?
So let me speak about this a little bit. And I did allude at the beginning of the presentation, we were going to talk a little bit about finances, and because I think it's also relevant for the discussion we're going to have later on the regular council meeting. So alongside of the work that we're doing in the liquid waste management plan, we are also have Urban Systems engaged, Joel Short, to undertake a financial model on how we do fund all of these things. So we look at everything that's involved. We look at, you know, all of our costs around capital improvements, around capital renewal, and around our operational costs, operational maintenance costs. And then we look at, okay, what are our water rates? What are our development costs? You know, what are our borrowing opportunities? Are we likely to get any grants? And we try and factor all of that in. So we run scenarios, grant, no grant, because grants aren't certain. What I can say is that from a water rate perspective, we are the initial, and this isn't complete yet, but we've done a fair amount of work on it. Initial evaluations are such that we can maintain rate stability. So we're not looking at having to increase water rates to our customers, and in fact, we may be able to lower them a bit. The DCCs currently are, and I did write it down. If I can find it. Bear with me here. I got it on another screen. So the DCCs currently, did have it ready.
It's coming up later.
So the DCCs were close to 5,000. They're going to have to go up to 8,000. And this is dependent on whether or not we're successful in getting some grants. Now, we didn't get it in our phase 4. There's still a potential we might get it in phase 5 works. I will put another caveat on the costing. Right now, I think as council is very aware, we are seeing just a tremendous amount of volatility in costing. So these costs of, you know, with respect to the phase 4 have already, you know, exceeded what we had originally estimated by, you know, fairly significant amount. But is that going to continue? Is that going to continue in the phase 5, or will it normalize a bit? We don't know. But I think everybody's aware how much, you know, 2x4s and plywood and these types of things have gone up. And so, yeah, we're not immune to that when we look to deliver these projects. So just a bit of a caveat on the costing, but the numbers that we have in front of council for the phase 4 works, you know, for the borrowing are intended to be conservative given what we know today. So we've costed in those volatility increases right now with a healthy contingency.
Good, thanks.
Okay. And will there be another slide on the funding at some point later on in the presentation?
No, but as we move into the next steps and we get more into the implementation really starts to include the costing. So we deemed it a bit premature to cost everything else. So for example, if council said, you know, we're very keen on doing the option 2 approach, well, our costing looks different than if we proceed with the option 1. But as you mentioned, it means prioritizing it, and it does mean, yeah, there's a fair amount of money, additional money that we're going to have to come up with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll have more questions later, I think.
Yeah. Councillor Koza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Scarrow calls them PPPs, but I'm a little bit more mature than that, and I just call them 3Ps. But when I did see that, I was surprised. I thought, what are we doing? We just broke the 3P model, and now we're going to go back to it. But then you guys clarified that it's actually not going back to a 3P and entering into agreements with other jurisdictions. In saying that, my information might be out of date, but I had heard that in the last while, that Ogle is having a problem with wood waste, getting wood waste, and as well, they're backed up on the back end, and not because they're so efficient that they're just moving the product through so fast and they can't sell it. So if they get to a point where they get into a bind, my understanding is we don't have a standing agreement with them. Could they just drop us at a moment's notice, or what? Where is our contingency on that? And what would happen if they did drop us? Well, I guess we would know what would happen, but if you could clarify that point as just my first question.
So yeah, there's a lot right there. Do we have some exposure? Yes. We have some protection in that we do provide regional service for septage. And so if we get dropped, then, we've got a little bit of a hammer saying, well, then maybe we drop septage. No one wants to take on septage. We also have, because the septage is a regional function, we are in partnership with the regional district. And so the regional district is very, very at risk too of not having a place to take their own biosolids from their plant, as well as they do actually provide the service as a regional function for septage. So they are looking at alternatives and options, and they're out ahead of it. So some more work to do there, but I don't think right now it's something we're really worried about. Not to say that it's not something we shouldn't be paying attention to.
And if it's something that does arise, we can always just go with our own, because we built like InVessel in Banff and stuff, and they're pretty interesting, but that's a separate topic. My other thing I just needed to clarify was between Councillor Gamble and Todd and I, Councillor McKenzie here and I were talking about it on the side, but as far as receiving, farmers are receiving water, they can only receive a secondary crop, not a primary crop. So you can spray the hay and then you can feed the hay to the cows and you can eat the cows, or you can spray the trees and then you can sell the trees or the bark mulch and stuff like that. So yes, Councillor Gamble's right. You can't spray it on grapes or apples or anything like that and then eat the apples. So there are farmers in our community that are very interested in that water. Like Macdonell told me himself, he said, a farmer can't farm without water, and he's trying to corner water up there and put little dams in and stuff. And he's trying to get as much water. So he would have a great, if we were able to provide him water. So that's just something else I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for that presentation, Aaron, and Greg, thanks for your answers. So when I look at this, obviously the overall expense is going to determine a lot of what we can and can't do for sure. Because obviously you can only get so much from a rock. But in this case, if I'm looking at this, as Councillor Kozub just said, I'm more towards something in between option 1 and option 2. I don't think that maximizing in-ground is the way to go, but I think it is some of that, and then reusing for irrigation, obviously. But I think it's a little more of a balance in between there. So that would be more of my take, right? Not obviously being a technician like some of us here, but I just think that would be a better approach. And then anytime we seem to want to go 100% on something, that's when we seem to get caught. So I would like to have all options open, and I think that's the way you keep from being stuck. And I've seen that happen way too many times and way too many different things. And I spend a lot of time in industry, and I see a lot of people get burned by doing the 100% approach. So I wouldn't approve it myself.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Councillor Ireland.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the presentation, guys. I don't have a lot to add in terms of questions, because my fellow councillors have thrown out almost everything I could think of. So thank you, fellow councillors, and Councillor Kozub for your insight to that, because I was wondering where that stood in terms of the spray. I'd say where I'd stand on it is, I too would, I prefer to see something like option 2, but yeah, option 1 not precluding it till we have a little bit more of an idea of what we can do, how we can provide this service and who, what customers we might have. So, yeah, I mean, option 3 would be interesting if there was a willing partner, but, a willing partner, really, who would be a willing partner that would be that valuable to us if Kelowna wasn't playing ball? It's all great for the regional district to be interested, but they'd have to get Kelowna to play ball. And if, you don't like about the lack of control, but let's face it, building massive infrastructure everywhere is in just one small place using it, and then another place building massive infrastructure and then using it when it could be shared is really a better solution for the planet. However, that being said, Kelowna is not my favorite place to partner with. So, if there was a possibility of not building that kind of infrastructure and contributing to, that bigger piece someplace else, not having to twin everything, like, everybody twins, everybody builds this stuff. That's not great. It's not great for the planet. It's great for the community because you want control, but it's not great for the planet. So I'd still like to see some fringe exploration of that, but I wouldn't want to spend a lot of money on it.
Okay, I have a couple of more councilors got a question, but I have a question. We also have a meeting that we have to get to shortly. I was at that announcement at UBC where UBC Vancouver and Vancouver were doing treatment that was going to take care of all biosolids and come up with fresh water, reusable. Is the technology such? I forget the engineer for Vancouver, but he was here. Got him in the note somewhere. But they were doing they have enough that they use a pilot of as though it was a community of 25,000, and they were working at doing this treatment with a new technology that was looking really, really good. I think I sent that along to somebody, but I'm not sure if you've investigated anything that Vancouver was doing with UBC and treatment that's different from what we're doing now. Any response? No. Don't know anything about it.
Through your mayor, are you looking for some commentary from us here?
Well, I just didn't know if there is something that's coming up that's less costly and more environmental friendly that they seem to be saying that would happen. Maybe Jeremy's got the answer.
I could provide a couple of comments here just in terms of being able to work with a few other regions and treatments here around the province. But a couple in particular, just to mention, is the wastewater industry itself is really turning over towards, some reuse and recycling thinking. So a lot of the industry is trying to make the best out of a situation where they're trying to reclaim as much as possible. So there are new technologies being introduced, about every 6 months. And all of those go through a number of different bench scale type testing, kind of what you're describing with Metro Vancouver, although at 25,000 person capacity, that's a little bit larger. I guess the main takeaway from us on this one is it's exciting to see the technology is evolving and advancing. It's not quite at the feasibility level to what you're describing today to put into place and to spend, $25+ million and, sort of fingers crossed and hope that it works out really well here locally. But what we do commit to, and part of the liquid waste management plan is providing an update, every decade or so, is being able to pay attention to those and just keep watching the feasibility options so that when the next update comes around that we are, fully abreast of what those options are like we are today. So the future looks pretty bright, but the opportunity to convert a lot of the different things, from what you're describing today is hard to do. That said, the way that phase 4 and 5 upgrades are being proposed right now, these are pretty advanced systems, especially for a community of about your size. So my own personal experience here would suggest you're batting above your weight, for your population already. And that's, I think, a pattern that you can continue to do over the long run.
Good, thank you. Jeremy, did you want to add to that? Yeah. Okay, Councilor Gamble?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And three questions, and I'll just give them to you first. One of the people in one of your meetings or one of the feedback was a question about sani stations. Can you talk about that? I know it's something that since I've been on council, and I don't want to say that again, over 15 and a half years. 130. Yeah, it feels like 130 sometimes. We're still waiting for the sani station in our community. So I'm just I want to know, is that going to happen soon? That's question one. Second one, the sewer expansion. Are we looking over the next 20 years of expanding in different areas, and will we be guided by our urban containment boundary? What kind of expansion are we looking at in Oyama, in Cars Landing, Okanagan Center, if any? And then the third thing is I support option one. It makes the most sense. I liked the idea that should we develop better technology, it may become safer to do a dual system for return water. At the present time, I don't think it's there, but that might change over time. So, you got to look ahead with a little bit of an open mind there. So there, what can you do for that?
So let me tackle these, Mr. Mayor. Sandy dumps. So I've been here 11 years, and yeah, we've been talking about sandy dumps probably the whole time. So there is an option for the public that they can go to the campground down in Turtle Bay, and there is they will take dumps there. I think the complaint is it's a bit expensive, it's a bit pricey. We can, I mean, it's typically in a liquid waste management plan, and we talked about this as a team, you're typically not getting down to that level of detail around, where are we putting a sandy dump. But maybe it is low-hanging fruit, and maybe it is something that council would like to prioritize, but it could definitely come out of a 5-year capital plan. And we could advance something there. It does, it comes at some cost. And there's some things you need to be concerned about, but it could happen for sure. At council's discretion, at council's will. In terms of the expansion, the expansion that we're planning and the containment area are very much linked, and by design. So the areas that we wanted to expand sewer service into, and it goes right back to this expand from the core. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, it's expensive. We're talking about $25 million. We are looking to expand into Oyama on the Isthmus, and that was discussed through the OCP. There's an upside to that. Why are we doing it? Protect public health, protect the lakes. We have some failing systems out there. What's the downside? Well, depends how you look at it. It opens up that area for development, and it needs to, in fact, be sustainable in terms of funding. And so you've opened up a lot of commercial development and a growth in that neighborhood. So it's it can be a bit of a trade-off. But yeah, those two are very much tied together. And so that same consideration, like there's calls like, well, we should sewer Okanagan Center. Well, if you sewer Okanagan Center, you will change Okanagan Center. It will naturally change to a higher density community, and I think it needs to. So we need to be aware of those considerations when we do look at where we're looking to put sewer service. And again, probably the most fundamental is, well, how are you going to pay for it? So if you try to do everything at once, how would you possibly do that in terms of a financial situation? It has to grow in a strategic way.
Okay, thanks. I got Todd. No, already had Penny. Yeah, no, Todd had it before her. I got the list here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Greg, thanks for that answer. Now, the number that I've heard from a certain staff member was to get sewer to Oyama was a lot higher than 25 million. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime in this plan. But I just curious what you think it would take in order to get that moved out to someplace like Cars Landing or Oyama. And same thing, Okanagan Center, I cannot see it happening. There's just nothing to develop. But Cars Landing and Oyama would be two things that to me would seem like a huge cost. And I can't see that happening myself in the next 2 decades, but can you correct me if I'm wrong on that one? So that's what I'd be curious about. And just before you answer that, my comments on a Sani dump. The one thing that's Sani dump that we should be aware of is it's not just waste that's getting dumped there, it's all the chemicals and everything else. You're adding a huge problem, you know, and a huge bunch of chemicals to deal with your plant. You know, it should be expensive because it's going to cost a lot to deal with. So I don't know if I would volunteering to support a Sani dump myself personally. But if you can answer that other one, Greg, and just clarify what we're talking about cost-wise, because it's all in nice to plan ahead. But if you know, our budget's going to be 3/4 wastewater coming up for the district, that's not something that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, so it's generally in the neighborhood of around $6 million to extend a trunk out to Oyama, and then another $6 million to service the retrofit areas themselves that have been identified. So we're close to $12 million to service Oyama, and you know, with development and with other growth and expansion, that would have to be picked up by developers. So that would get those core service areas. So in around $12 million, and you'd be looking similar to take it down to Okanagan Center, and because of the distance to Cars Landing, you know, we haven't costed, but that much more again. I mean, it's quite a distance, and you just don't have the densities. Yeah, it would be very difficult to do that from a financial sustainability standpoint.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reid, or Carl.
Thank you. My question kind of builds on the questions from Penny and Todd, actually. I've got the map in front of me here from the OCP, and if Oyama is 12 million, which is approximately 50% of the retrofit budget, is there a plan or an idea to look at those low-hanging fruits? So which areas, if you extended, are going to be the cheapest to extend, but also bring the highest density, and actually have a staged plan? Because I think it is a little tough to ask developers to pay 12 million to do the extension plus 80,000 in the DCCs to then build in that extension. That is going to be cost prohibitive, as well as fundamentally changing the neighborhoods. So I would appreciate if there's time to see a staged spend of this retrofit. So where can we go quickest for the least amount of money, but access the most amount of residential, high density residential, to get this figure, which we need, the 4,000 new units, because we need them to fund at $8,000 a pop a significant portion of the upgrade capacity. So we can't ignore expansion because it's going to drive the funding for the rest of the work. But equally, I think it needs to be maybe a little bit more phased and staged, and from a efficiency standpoint in terms of cost and incoming revenue.
Blair's got the answer to that.
I don't have the answer, but before we answer that, I just wanted to throw one more aspect of it. I appreciate the question. But if we can add in the need, so it's all great to say, you know, where's the greatest places for development going to happen, but where's the greatest need? You know, as far as I understood, it's that east bench,
Yeah.
along Bond Chase roads where the heavy clays and there's systems failing quite regularly. So do we have a prioritization based on need as well?
So let me jump in here, because I think there's a lot of information that's going to be really important for council. So when the original evaluations were done on where should retrofit sewer occur, there was a very extensive list of multiple account evaluation performed, including need, where there are problems, costs, but we need to differentiate between retrofit sewers and development. retrofit sewers are going in and servicing areas that already exist, homes that are already there. So there's no development cost charges there. And they're really going to be grant dependent. And that's where you can get good grant support. So you can get, 2/3 grants there. And it's actually probably the only way you're going to be able to advance them is through grants, because otherwise they become cost prohibitive for the homeowners. So for the property owners. So and there has been good grant support over the years for retrofit sewers. And from a strategic standpoint, going after low-hanging fruit can be quite limiting now. Like if you do the easy stuff first, how do you get the more expensive, harder stuff afterwards? So and keep in mind too, when you're delivering these projects, you're ripping up neighborhoods. So it makes a lot of sense to do this on a broad basis. And typically retrofit sewers are delivered in 500 unit type blocks for this very reason. So if one house only costs $5,000 to connect and the other one costs $50,000 to connect, you can spread those costs out so everybody's paying an equal amount, and then you can get it done. Otherwise, you'll get the $5,000 house connected and you'll never get the $50,000 house connected. So, the strategy we've suggested we're following is do it as a broader project. You're going to be talking about ripping up streets, disrupting neighborhoods. You're going to be rebuilding those roads. You may update some water mains at the same time. Go in there, do it wholeheartedly, get the whole thing done, and then share that cost and do it with grant support. So I think that's the strategy that I think makes a lot of sense.
Okay. You have a wrap up?
Well, I just had a couple of comments, and I'll say it again, Greg. The last thing I want to see is a pipe go down to Oyama, period. I think that's the wrong answer. We talked about Okanagan Center. A sewer would change Okanagan Center. Well, let me tell you, that sewer will change Oyama, and it'll change it big. I think I'm not a technician, and you are, and you've told me many, many times this is the least expensive way to go. It just seems to me that the maintenance of a 6-mile pipe and the oversizing of it and all of the stuff that goes along with the future is just way too much. I would much rather see us change our acceptance perhaps of smaller septic treatment facilities that could be on the isthmus independent from the main one in Lake Country. Those are my thoughts on this, and I've thought about it for the last 15, 20 years, as long as Penny has, and I just completely disagree with the pipe going down. I believe Pelmwash is where you're planning on putting it. I just completely disagree with that, and I think I probably will till the day I die.
Okay, that's not happening tonight anyway, so, Blair, did you want to comment?
Yeah, sorry,
Wrap it up?
yeah, I still don't, so is there no prioritization on areas dependent on need?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was part of it. And in fact, all those areas we've identified are the areas of highest need. There are areas where there's problems, where they're failing, where there's concerns about impacts on lake. The isthmus being one of those.
Do we have a prioritized list of that? Like what's 1, what's 2, what's 3?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So if we could share that, that'd be great.
But again, if you started to break it down and do 1 first, then 2, and you'll see 1 might be 15,000 a house. Number 7, which actually might be your highest, 1 might be the cheapest, but you're less concerned. Number 7 might be your actually highest priority, but your most expensive. So you've got to look at these things together.
Yeah, okay, good. We'll wrap it at that, and thank you very much. We gotta go in camera now, I think. And
You might want to say.
Thank,